Tantor Audio presents The Reason for Flowers, Their History, Culture, Biology, and How They Change Our Lives, by Stephen Buchmann, narrated by Jonathan Yen. Preface. Most open by dawn's first light, or unfurl their charms as the day progresses. Others unwrap their diaphanous petals like expensive presents after dark, waiting for the arrival of beloved guests under a radiant moon. We know them as flowers. They are nature's advertisements, using their beauty to beguile and reward passing insects or birds or bats or people willing to attend to their reproduction. The beauty of their shapes, colors, and scents transforms us through intimate experiences in our gardens, homes, offices, parks and public spaces, and wildlands. Importantly, flowers feed and clothe us. Their fruits and seeds keep the world's 7.2 billion people from starvation. Flowers represent our past, along with our hope for a bright future. Before recorded history, all cultures collected, used, and admired flowers, not only for utilitarian purposes, but for their elusive fragrances and ephemeral forms that, ironically, symbolized recurring vigor and even immortality. They have enthralled and seduced us, exploiting entire civilizations to enhance their sex lives and spread their seeds. We give and receive flowers as tributes and to commemorate life's many triumphs and everyday events. Flowers accompany us from cradle to grave. As spices, they flavor our foods and beverages. We harvest their delicate scents, combining them into extravagantly expensive mixtures for perfuming our bodies to evoke passion and intrigue. Some yield a woven textile for every purpose, like the valuable fibers surrounding cotton seeds that began their development inside the ovary of a fertilized flower. Flowers inspired the first artists, writers, photographers, and scientists, just as they do today on street corners, in florist shops and farmers' markets, in books, paintings, sculptures, and commercial advertising. They moved online with ease. Arguably, because of the sustaining role they undoubtedly played in the lives of our hominid ancestors, we might not be here if there were no flowers, a love affair begun early. Once captivated by them, I observed nature's infinite palette of garden blooms and California wildflowers in the chaparral-clothed canyons near my boyhood home. The honeybees I kept visited flowers for their rewards of nectar and pollen. The bees fed upon the pollen and converted the nectar into delicious, golden, thick honey I drizzled atop slices of hot toast at breakfast. As a child, finding and observing bees of all kinds on wildflowers became my passion and quest across California's wildlands. The bees showed me the way, leading to a lifelong dedication to flowering plants. As a pollination ecologist and entomologist, my professional career has focused on flowers and their animal visitors. Using 35mm film and making silver gelatin prints of blossoms has been an abiding interest since my teenage years. Today, I carry a 35mm digital camera and close-up lenses to photograph flowers and their pollinators. Having written books on bees, I knew a different kind of book must follow, one that traces humankind's fascination with and use of flowers for every imaginable purpose and delight, since prehistory across all continents and cultures. There is much that we fail to appreciate in flowers, especially the roles they play in human affairs. Why do they make us happy and lift our spirits? Many people insist they heal our bodies and minds. You are about to undertake a journey into the secretive world of flowers, animals, and humanity. I want you to see and smell like a hungry bee and a hummingbird, but also like a plant breeder, flower farmer, importer of cut blooms, or a floral biologist. Together, we will explore the industry and economics of the global production, distribution, and sales of container plants and cut blooms. As you join me, consider keeping a single flower or a colorful bouquet close by as your botanical muse along our shared path of discovery. Part 1. Sexuality and Origins. Chapter 1. Attracting Attention. A flower's fragrance declares to all the world that it is fertile, available, and desirable, its sex organs oozing with nectar. Its smell reminds us in vestigial ways of fertility, vigor, life force, all the optimism, expectancy, and passionate bloom of youth. We inhale its ardent aroma, and, no matter what our ages, we feel young and nubile in a world aflame with desire. Diane Ackerman, A Natural History of the Senses, 1990. What am I? Here for you to identify is a living organism, much loved and admired. Having no say in the matter, millions are bought and sold, removed from their natural habitat for the pleasure of the buyers, living fast, dying young without offspring, then discarded without a second thought. Sometimes they enjoy a better fate, free to live outdoors, reproducing prolifically, enjoying full lifespans, their beauty on display for all to see. The smell of this organism is a hauntingly sweet fragrance, once inhaled, never forgotten. The appearance is dramatic. A long tumescent rod, topped by a broad, gray-purple tip oozing a clear, sticky liquid, juts suggestively from the center of a yellow, star-like throat. Surprisingly, this phallic-like structure is a female, not a male organ. The broad, viscid tip evolved to catch and hold pollen grains, dust-like particles that are the male essence. Surrounding the long rod, 6 yellow-green arms project from the star-like mouth, the bulging orange packets at their tips ready to split wide open to release sperm at just the right time. A hermaphrodite, with male and female parts united in one body, it is capable of having sex there within, though preferring to mate with others, especially non-relatives. The largest and most spectacular part of this body consists of the 2 pinwheel-like whorls surrounding the sex organs, one on top of the other, outlined in white and shaded from white to pale pink to a deep, almost purple-pink hue, their surfaces spotted with raised red dots. Below, where the whorls join the green stalk, is an ovary containing eggs waiting to be fertilized. Lacking legs or wings, this regal-looking organism is grounded, unable to move during its entire lifetime, and thus dependent upon animal intermediates. If its concentrated appeal is able to reach out, it is the bees, or perhaps other animals, that transport its sperm, helping it to reproduce. Earthbound and immobile, it casts a gaze upward, to the stars, as it whispers a name sending a message of fanciful dreams, optimism, and unlimited possibilities. What am I? A flower, of course, but more specifically a stargazer lily. The stargazer, which came to market in 1978, is the result of many years of crossbreeding efforts by the eccentric genius lily breeder Leslie Woodruff, who wanted a beautiful, fragrant, spotted lily that would hold its blooming head proudly high, unlike any other horticultural lily of the time. Florist shop product it may be, but the stargazer is nonetheless typical of all flowers, which is to say that even though a breeder tinkered with its genealogical stock to make it a crowd-pleaser in the human marketplace, its structure, appearance, and smell are ultimately all about attracting the pollinators it needs to reproduce. Outcrossing instead of selfing, self-pollination, prevails among flowering plants. Mating with non-relatives increases genetic diversity by spreading favorable and subsequent genes through the population, thereby enhancing the fitness of the next generation of plants. To achieve that outcrossing, flowers broadcast a powerful message to potential pollinators. Flowers are perhaps a little bit of everything, but they are, in essence, the sex organs of the plant. They need sexual favors to spread their sperm and have their eggs fertilized. Natural selection has made them into some of nature's most successful advertisers. Their petals act as living billboards, deploying an extraordinary array of shapes, sizes, color palettes, and scents to communicate the treasures awaiting their sexual enablers. Texture matters, too. They may have matte or glossy finishes, smooth or hairy surfaces, depending on the preferences of the animals they need to attract. Although we humans have come to love looking at and experiencing flowers in our own way, their petaloid messages are not meant for our eyes or noses. Instead, they have been beckoning for millennia to the tiny insect aerialists that became the first flyers on the planet, taking to the air during the Devonian Age, which began over 400 million years ago. The two trajectories combined in a later age and have had a long and fascinating history that is by no means finished now. The evolution of flowers. Plants have not always had flowers. Certain plants, the angiosperms, invented flowers and never turned back. They chose wisely. As I hope is obvious, this is anthropomorphic shorthand for a complicated set of biological processes, for the plants did not make decisions. They tried everything, and natural selection, survival of the fittest, ensured that their genes were the result of the most successful experiments and were reproduced. Flowers evolved from the small leaves that bunched together at the stem tips. When they changed later and took on roles that were very different from those of their leafy progenitors, they lost their green color and began developing into the petal and bract structures we now recognize within flowers. These were their come-hither beacons and perfume dispensers, which changed over time. As traits and their gene frequencies within populations varied, they were inherited one generation to the next, creating the best available fit of flower to animal. These match-ups are known as floral mutualisms, forms of tug-of-war, a give and take whereby flowers and their pollinators are mutualists in a co-evolutionary endeavor that does not cross the line into antagonism. Bees prefer sweeter nectar and choose flowers with more sugar. Gradually, in their descendants, flowers with richer nectar prevailed. This is also brinkmanship. If flowers offer too little, the bees won't come. Too much, and they've wasted precious energy. Flowers and insects are mutualists, but they are first and foremost looking out for themselves, satisfying their own needs. Since flowers don't get around much, unless they're in a wedding bouquet or a high school prom corsage, they found ways to have sex with other plants. Not a fling or an affair, but the real thing. The animals that fly from flower to flower, along the way dispersing each flower's sperm, in the form of pollen, to other flowers, enable plants to go on virtual dates with each other, and to reproduce. Pollinators afford a wonderful solution to their mobility handicap, and one that nature began to put into action over 100 million years ago, when the earliest flowering plants came into being. The flower revealed. To understand the true meaning of flowers, you need to be familiar with a few terms for the floral parts. The natural objects we call flowers might call on you to have a fresh-cut flower nearby. Let the blossom be your guide. A lily flower would be ideal, which is why I open the chapter with the stargazer. It's readily available, with parts big enough to be seen without a magnifying glass, and it's not coy about sharing the secrets of its sexuality. Although other common flowers, such as roses, carnations, peonies, and chrysanthemums, share the same basic anatomy, they are perhaps too roughly. Parting those floral skirts to get at what lies beneath might be a bit challenging to the amateur botanist voyeur, so let's consider the simple lily, a big, brash beauty. As mentioned, it is a hermaphrodite. Starting from the top of the flower, we see that long tumescent rod, the female sex organ. It's called the pistil, or carpel, and it has 3 sections. The first part you see, consisting of the style, the slender stalk, and the stigma, at the tip, rises straight up and out of the third part, the ovary, found below the petals. Floral styles can be short and squat, or, as in the stargazer, long and thin. The stigma at the tip is moist or gooey to catch and hold the pollen that come to it courtesy of a hungry pollinating animal, or perhaps a passing breeze. Sprouting from the floral base and surrounding the stalk-like part of the pistil are the stamens. Rising on their own long, slender stalks, called filaments, they emerge outside the swollen green ovary. Depending on the flower, there may be a few or many. The stargazer has 6 stamens. Atop each are 2 structures that look like conjoined hot dogs. These are the anthers, containing thousands of dust-like pollen particles. As the flower matures, the anther walls peel back and release their precious cargo. Microscopic in size and spherical or football-shaped, the pollen grains are yellow or orange, but, depending on the plant, may also be red, green, blue, purple, white, or nearly black. They're covered with an oily coating that makes them stick together so that they cling to pollinators, or to a probing finger. The grains are ornamented with furrows, ridges, pores, bumps, and spines arranged in patterns almost as uniquely distinctive as human fingerprints, which enable botanists to tell what family, genus, or species of plant the pollen came from, just by looking at the pollen under a microscope. Beneath the pistil and the stamens are the flower petals, and below the petals are the sepals, which are often green. In the case of the stargazer, however, the outer whorl of what appears to be the petals is actually a set of 3 sepals, for in some flowers, including lilies and amaryllises and orchids, the sepals and the petals look almost identical. Sitting immediately above the sepals is the enlarged green ovary that is the bottom part of the pistil. If you cut through the ovary crosswise, you find the chambers containing the stargazer's ovules, its future seeds, which look like tiny peas. Depending on the plant, there can be many ovules, or just one, but regardless of how many there are, within each ovule is an embryo sac, which contains the egg and the other reproductive cells. The double fertilization maneuver. This weird-sounding reproductive action is so unique to angiosperms, the flowering plants, that it is one of the traits used to characterize and identify them. It's called double fertilization because it involves not 1 but 2 sperm cells, one that fertilizes the egg, and the other to help form the endosperm, the starchy tissue that feeds the developing plant embryo. Fertilization begins when the pollen grains land upon the gooey stigma, the tip of our lily, after which things happen quickly. Each pollen grain swells up, nearly ready to burst, until it germinates, and one part of it sends a thin tube down the floral style, probing its way toward the ovary, while the other part, a generative cell, travels down the pollen tube. Finally, after several hours or a few days, as the cell approaches the embryo sac of the ovary, it divides into 2 sperm cells, ready to play their roles in double fertilization. The chromosomes from one sperm cell fuse with the egg cell that will develop into the tiny plant embryo found within every seed. The chromosomes from the second sperm cell fuse with different cells inside the embryo sac, developing into the endosperm. Floral rewards. What's in it for the birds and the bees? For fertilization to occur, outside pollinators are enticed to visit flowers. But there has to be some reward for the pollinators, and some way of advertising that reward, or else they won't bother to visit the blooms. So, flowers fulfill many needs for their animal visitors. For bees, as well as some other pollinators, flowers are cafes and rest stops, offering a rich abundance of food. They can also be rendezvous sites for pollinators to find each other and pair up. For predators, including crab spiders, ambush bugs, and mantids, wildflowers and garden blossoms provide ready-made perches from which to hunt their prey. Many insects seek out flowers for the warmth they find inside. This is especially true in Arctic and alpine regions. The parabolic-shaped petals of these flowers not only warm the heat-seeking creatures, but also speed up the development of ovules within flower ovaries. The remaining floral rewards consist mainly of nest-building materials and sex pheromone precursors, in the case of some bees and butterflies. Floral oils, for example, can be eaten, but some tropical bees also turn them into protective linings for their brood cells. Fragrances produced by orchids and other sources are the pheromone-like precursors harvested by male orchid bees and used in their aerobatic courtship and mating rituals. Of course, the single most important reason insects and other animals visit flowers is to feed. Within flowers, they find nutritious food for themselves or their larvae. The adults of most flower-visiting insects seek food only for themselves. This gives them the energy they need to fly or stay warm. But other insects, including bees and certain specialist wasps, bring the pollen back to the hive or solitary nests, where the protein-rich grains feed them and also provide nourishment for their developing brood. Flowers produce 4 types of rewarding food substances to draw the pollinating animals, hold their attention, and keep them coming back for more. These foods are nectar, pollen, floral oils, and the edible body tissues of some flowers. Nectar is sweet but watery liquid secreted from glands located near the base of the petals on most flowers. A high-energy food, nectar oozes up from hidden nectar glands into crevices deep inside most flowers, but can sometimes be produced elsewhere within flowers or from buds and leaf bases. Nectar is a high-energy liquid food, usually hidden from view. The sugars reward bees, wasps, flies, butterflies, moths, birds, and bats. But to reach those low-lying pools of nectar, they have to brush up against the stamens, causing pollen to stick to them, ready to be transmitted to the next flower they visit. Floral nectar is a blend of 3 sugars, sucrose, glucose, and fructose, but may contain other minor sugars. When the pollinators eat and digest the sugars in the nectar, they get the energy they need to fly or to stay warm in the cold. Certain social bees, such as honeybees, bumblebees, and stingless bees, are able to turn the nectar into the sugary fossil fuel we know as honey, which can be saved for the future. Honeybees visit their waxen cupboards to reclaim this stored energy during cold winters as well as periods of inclement weather. Nectar, while an important fuel food, is not as critical for bees as the pollen that they obtain from flowers. They can't live without it, nor feed their young. Pollen contains from 5 to 60% protein, all of the essential amino acids, diverse lipids, and antioxidants that bees need. It's not so easy to get at those nutrients, however. Pollen grains, tiny as they are actually super tough. Imagine them as hard-walled ping-pong balls with a nutritious liquid center. Their outer walls are a biopolymer, a natural plastic. These walls are so resistant to chemical attack that we find pollen grains fossilized in 100-million-year-old sediments. But that doesn't stop the bees, which use a special trick to eat the otherwise indigestible pollen. They extract the pollen interiors with a combination of osmotic shock, which causes the grains to swell up and burst, and enzymes from within their digestive tracts, which break them down further, allowing their nutrients to be absorbed. Once eaten, the undigested outer walls of the pollen are defecated by adults and their larvae. Looking at this waste product, we can perform a bit of forensic scatology to tell what types of pollen the bees ate, thereby knowing what plants they'd visited. I know this probably doesn't do a lot for you, but it's exciting for bee scientists such as myself. Just as an aside, while pollen is the ideal, balanced natural diet for bees, it may cause problems for mammalian digestive systems. Those who buy bee-collected pollen from health food stores face a possible food allergy risk because this pollen may come from ragweed or other allergenic plants. So, you might want to sparingly test a few pollen pellets before heaping them on your breakfast cereal. Honey is a different matter, however, since it contains only the faintest trace of pollen and may actually benefit hay fever sufferers. Another category of food offered to pollinators is super high-energy floral oils contained within exotic flowers in the world's tropical rainforests and deserts. These oils, which are used by specialist bees in the genus Centris, come mostly from flowers in the tropical family Malpighiaceae. These flowers bear unusual secretory glands on their undersides. Beneath a protective skin covering, like a blister you might get from gardening without gloves, the secretory glands contain oils with unique chemistries that are sought out by bees. Female bees land on the oil flowers and take up a four-legged stance. If you could slow down the rapid action, you'd see the bees raking their front legs across the oil glands. Their legs have broad, flattened scraper hairs that rupture the oil blisters and transfer the oils to the mats of thick hairs, almost like scrub brushes, on their back legs. When they fly home, they mix the floral oils they've collected with pollen, often from other kinds of flowers, creating a nutritious bee bread for their hungry larvae. The oil has another use, too. Some bees enzymatically convert it into a slow-hardening wall coating for the underground chambers, the brood cells, where the bee larvae grow and mature into adult bees. Other chemicals in the oil may protect the developing bees from the ravages of soil-borne bacteria and fungi. Nest-building materials may also come from the flowers that grow on the tropical clusia tree. Its flowers are a sticky mess because they have glands that ooze tacky resins that attract pollinating bees, which harvest the resins for use in their nest building. Perhaps the strangest floral rewards of all, at least in terms of their presentation and later use, are the essential oils, terpenes, and similar chemicals produced by specialized orchids, for example, Stanhope, Coryanthes, and Gongora. These orchids produce no edible rewards, not a trace of pollen or nectar for their bee pollinators, the emerald green or cobalt blue beauties known as euglossines. Since these orchid bees are native only to the neotropical forests, from southern Sonora, Mexico, to the rainforests of the Amazon basin, you may not have had the pleasure of seeing one of these living jewels. The male orchid bees, never the females, visit the orchids, and while they are paying their floral visit, the bees probe for nectar that isn't there, and for pollen that does exist, but is so securely shrink-wrapped inside testicle-shaped packages, known as pollinia, that it is unavailable to them. But during the bees' search for food, the orchid flower, whose shape has been molded by millions of years of fine-tuning, maneuvers them in.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?